Judaism, Presentation 3, Jewish Observances and Practices. Following is the important rites of passage for Jews. First of all, at birth, as you might expect, it goes from birth to death, is one's circumcision for a male. No such rite of passage for a female child. That happens at 8 days. The next thing that happens is 12 or 13 years later, the bar mitzvah, and for some, the bat mitzvah. These words mean son of the covenant, bar mitzvah. Bat is for daughter, the daughter of the covenant. And this is one's entry into adult life. I would add that the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah are times of considerable celebration. This is more than a birthday party. This is, as some of you may know from the Latino heritage, something of a quinceañera. And so it's a grand celebration. As far as I know, it does not involve having a large dance as you have with the quinceañera, but it does involve a large celebration for family and friends. And then there is the marriage. The marriage is different from what one might expect from the Christian perspective, and perhaps from some others similar to it. There is a canopy within. It doesn't mean it's outside. It's within a room, a canopy under which, for sort of a notion of intimacy and enclosure, under which the bride and groom and officiating rabbi meet. They make vows to one another under that canopy. And then there is a cup of wine that they share to celebrate it and to seal it. And then there's a signing of a marriage document. What is notably different here is that if you go to a Jewish marriage, you don't have to sit for a lengthy time while there are some prayers offered and there are some words said by a presiding minister. It is simpler, though equally celebrative, ceremony. And then death. At death, one is to be buried, and this is customary in the Mediterranean heat, buried within 24 hours unless one dies on a Sabbath or a holy day. And then one is to be buried, of course, soon after that. After that, then, there are 7 days of mourning by the bereaved family, most of all a spouse for a deceasing spouse. And this is called the Shiva, and it's related to the word Shabbat, or Sabbath, and it is the word for 7 for any next of kin. And then we come to the celebration of the observance of Jewish holy days. First of all, the Sabbath. It begins every Friday sundown and goes to Saturday dusk, 24-hour period, but it goes by the Jewish calendar rather than the Roman one of starting at midnight. And so what one does on a Friday night, by standard custom, though it's not always observed strictly, is that one lights candles. The father, patriarch of the family, recites a benediction over wine and bread, and then there is a meal, a special meal, of course. There are synagogue services then on the Sabbath, that would be on Saturday as we know it, during the morning typically. And the Orthodox are strict at doing no work on the Sabbath. I told you earlier about the Orthodox synagogue close to me, and it's interesting that they do no work on the Sabbath, even in the form of driving a car. And so the person that lives around the corner from me, though he's a senior citizen, he walks some 10 blocks to the synagogue service. Others I found when I attended spend the night with someone, another Jewish member close by, closer to the synagogue, like across the street or something, and they manage the no work feature in that way. Now, I can't tell you how they get home after that, but I presume it's also not by car, at least not by any car that they drive. I was told by my neighbor that if I wanted, I told him I thought of picking him up, but I thought that that might violate the no work rule. He said, no, it'd be fine for you to pick me up. It's just that he couldn't drive and pick someone else up. So let us proceed to our second page. The Torah is read through each year. The Torah, my friends, is some 350, 400 pages, depending on your translation. It is a lengthy set of material because please remember, by the way, by Torah, here I'm talking about the first 5 books of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They read through all of that in a single year every year. And so they get to know the Torah. And of course, I'm talking about reading through it in Hebrew. And so the men, at least, get to know, they learn their Hebrew that way, of course, and they get to know their Torah in Hebrew. And so it's a remarkable feat. It is still possible to learn that much material by memory if you repeat it over and over as they do. And you'll find if you go to something like a graduate school that there are students and professors who have been in that Orthodox tradition who can give you lengthy quotations by heart of parts of the Hebrew scriptures, including often parts outside the Torah, of course. Now, there is reverence shown to the Torah. Remember, we are talking about a book that's considered a holy book. And the reverence that is shown by it in the beginning of each service, though this, by the way, did not happen in the Orthodox service that I was in, and I'm not quite sure why, but the reverence that is shown to it, especially by Hasidic Jews, is that the rabbi who is supervising activities and leading activities will hold the Torah up, a large version of it, not 8.5 by 11, but maybe 11 by 14 or larger, elaborately bound, and he will parade around with the Torah up above his head. He will parade around the whole group of people in the audience, and they will show their reverence for it as that begins their service. Kind of an opening show of devotions. Meanwhile, during the week, the devotional acts, they recite certain portions, most of all the Shema, twice a day. And please notice that I just gave you a short excerpt of the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God, or something like that. And but they recite Deuteronomy 6:4 through 9, 6 verses. So naturally, reciting that twice a day, they learn that quite well to where they can rapidly roll it off of their tongue. And then there is also, as a devotional act, placing of a cubic box on one's left arm and forehead called the tefillin. That little box has within it a tiny writing up and rolling up of a portion of the Torah. I believe it's Deuteronomy 6:4-9. I'm not quite sure about that. And then there is something added to the outside of their houses, the mezuzah, boxes on their doorposts. Those represent that they are a part of the covenant community. And last but not least, there's a prayer shawl as well as a yarmulke for the head. The prayer shawl is a talit, which they wear that has tassels hanging down on the sides that they wear during the day, and especially they wear it to, or it's most evident that they wear it to the synagogue service if they're Orthodox. Meanwhile, there are women's responsibilities. The women are important in many cases in Hebrew scriptures. At the time of the Talmud, however, the Roman period, 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries, the Talmud was stricter against women because that could give the Jews a bad name, bad reputation among the Romans, and they wanted to avoid getting bad reputation as much as they could with the Romans because they already had enough problems as it was. So the Talmud set down, and has endured for a very long time, set down stricter rules against women. However, if you by chance are acquainted with Fiddler on the Roof, and if you're not, I would recommend it. It's about a Russian Jewish family. There is Tevye, who is the patriarch in charge, except if you see the movie or see the play, you'll find that it's very much his wife who is in charge, and he is only a figurehead. And that points to the fact that Jewish women have always been very strong figures in their home and to some extent in their community too. And please notice the next bullet. There has been a change in recent times for a new spirit of gender equality. Let me elaborate briefly in this way. I worked in the inner city helping churches with poor people and things like that, and was in some community organizations. And the strongest people in some of those organizations that were inter-religious, involved other religions, were some wealthy Jewish women. And it was notable how they could make things happen in Dallas, Texas. And so it was, and they continue to be forces to be dealt with. And among the most notable in Dallas is a woman named Annette Strauss. She's not the, she was at one time mayor, maybe in the 80s, I'm not quite sure. And she has played she and many Jewish women in Dallas have played major roles in helping people who are underrepresented. And I would hasten to add too that they are the biggest supporters and proponents for help to the African American community for many, many years. And it may go back to the early 20th century, I'm not sure, but certainly since the Second World War. So that's the much more positive story on women that one finds in Judaism than we have found in any of the religions so far. And we will find another version of that positive story on the liberation of women when we get to Christianity. Now this brings us to the High Holy Days. The High Holy Days start with New Year, except New Year is not anywhere around January. It's in early fall, September, October. And you can see I put down what the dates were in 2014. It was in late September. It's always late September, early October. And it starts a 10-day period of penance, meaning expressing regret to God in a public fashion for one's sins by the blowing of the shofar, or ram's horn. And then following that is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, or Yom Kippur, is the Day of Atonement, literally. Yom is day, Kippur is atonement. And this comes at the end of 10 days, at which point there is a time of confession. And let me note with you what is meant by atonement and confession. What the Jews do is that they ask God yearly at this time of the year, the early fall, the beginning of their new year, they confess to him that they have done some wrong things through the year. I don't think they typically itemize them. They have done some wrong things through the year, and they ask God to have mercy on them. Now, mercy, friends, is different from forgiveness. Mercy means that God is going to overlook them. And so the doctrine of the Day of Atonement is that if you ask God to overlook them, he will overlook them for 1 year. That's the way that the practice and the text is understood. Therefore, one has to come back to the next year before one and ask him again for another year's reprieve. And so that is how the doctrine works with the Day of Atonement. So we go next to some religious festivals. Regarding the Yom Kippur festival, there's also a Tabernacles festival, and that one is mentioned, by the way, in the Christian New Testament. Tabernacles is the word Sukkot. And Tabernacles is something like, and I'm sorry I don't have the dates up here for you, is something like, it's a Thanksgiving festival for harvest, and therefore it is very much like, but not at quite the same time of year. I believe it's in August. Our Thanksgiving festival in November, which celebrates the finishing of the harvest. And then there is Yom Kippur that comes after that, Simchat Torah, the glorification of the Torah at the end of the cycle of the readings of the Torah. Remember, the Torah, the first 5 books, are read in Hebrew all the way through from the first of the year to the end of the year. And so this glorification of the Torah is a special celebration of their conclusion of the readings all the way through, it would be Deuteronomy. And then we come to the Festival of Lights. As I have noted before, this is a festival at Christmas time. It is a festival celebrating after the writing of the scriptures had finished, and so it's not within them, but it is found in a subsequent book called First Maccabees that has subsequent history of the Maccabean revolt and era after that. It's a liberty that was brought from Judas Maccabeus against the, I should say by Judas Maccabeus, by the against the Syrians in 165. And they light a candle on a menorah, and they light one for 8 evenings. The weapons, as the story goes, weapons are made into a menorah, and the oil in that menorah lasted, the oil that should have lasted for 1 day lasted 8 days, and so that's why they celebrate it for 8 days. There is a 9-branch menorah of candles that are lit for this celebration. And then number 4, the Purim festival. Festival of Lots. This is, as you can see, February, March, a spring festival. It's a rescue of the Persian Jews from Haman, and that's in the book of Esther, with Mordecai playing an important role also. Esther the woman, more important, Mordecai the man. And then the Pesach festival. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm recording this on Monday, the 30th of March for you. And the Passover festival is coming very soon. It is coming at the time of Easter for us. It's not exactly that, and so I wish, frankly, that I had checked on it before I started my presentation, but I forgot to. But the Passover festival is the festival that was that Jesus's Last Supper was celebrating, because in Luke 22, for example, they say his disciples say to him, "It's necessary." That means it's God's will for us to celebrate the Passover. Where are we going to do that? Because they didn't have a place of residence in Jerusalem. And so that led to the Last Supper. At the Last Supper, it's the most important family festival, celebrating the freedom that they have gained from Egypt, going way back to the Exodus. And so it's always around the around the Christian Easter time. And then there is a period of unleavened bread, festival of unleavened bread, for 7 days after that. And this is, once again, celebration of the Exodus. And then we have the feast of the Festival of Weeks, Shavuot. That's related to the word seven in the plural. 50 days after the Passover, in other words, that'll turn out to be late May, early June. This is celebrating the wheat harvest. That is the first major harvest of the year. And celebration of that wheat harvest is what was, so it's sometimes called first fruits. That is the time that in Acts 2, for the Christians, they celebrated Pentecost. This is the point at which, while they were celebrating Pentecost, meaning the feast of Shavuot, of weeks, late May, early June, after Jesus had ascended into heaven, what happened was that there was an experience of the Holy Spirit landing on people, and there were little flames, and there were on them, but they didn't burn them, and there was also speaking in unknown tongues. Very strange phenomenon. Of course, more about that when we get to Christianity. But that is to show a Christian version of celebrating the first fruits of belief in Jesus as the Messiah. So, sorry to digress so much from Judaism, but it's a very important feast for the Jews and a very important one for the Christians as well. And so we come to our final little snippet. And that is Feast of Weeks is considered the anniversary of the Torah coming down by Moses from God on Mount Sinai. So that is the original meaning of it, not just a festival of first harvest. So that concludes our study of Judaism, and I hope you're able to get all of this into your open it up satisfactorily for yourself, and I will continue shortly with the beginning of the lectures on Christianity. Thank you very much.